Isaiah Russell was 38 years old and worked as a senior operations analyst at Vanguard Freight Systems in downtown Chicago. Most people in the company believed he was forgettable, quiet, replaceable. The kind of man who spent his lunch breaks alone with a sandwich and black coffee while executives laughed behind glass walls upstairs. What they didn't know was that Isaiah had spent 14 months quietly collecting evidence that could destroy half the leadership floor. Damian Whitmore slammed the report across the conference table hard enough to shake the water glasses. "You are a liability to this company." 80 employees went silent. Then Damian pointed toward the door and told security to remove Isaiah from the room. "Before we continue, comment your country and local time below." I always like seeing where these stories are reaching people. And if you enjoy slow burn revenge stories with real consequences, subscribe now. Tomorrow's story gets even darker. The headquarters of Vanguard Freight Systems sat on Wacker Drive like a polished monument to corporate confidence. 43 floors of smoked glass, white marble lobby, silent elevators that moved executives faster than everyone else. The company moved freight across 37 states, retail inventory, medical equipment, automotive parts, nearly $8 billion in annual logistics contracts. And inside that building, fear traveled faster than cargo. Most employees learned the rules quickly. Never question leadership in meetings, never embarrass an executive publicly, and never make Damian Whitmore look unprepared. Damian ran the Midwest division like a private kingdom. At 46, he had the kind of face business magazines like Printing beside headlines about modern leadership, expensive teeth, controlled gray at the temples, tailored Navy suits that probably cost more than most warehouse workers made in a month. Every Monday morning, his black Aston Martin DBX occupied the reserved space directly outside the executive entrance. People noticed those things. They were supposed to. Isaiah Russell noticed different things. He noticed how often shipping delays disappeared from official reports before quarterly reviews. He noticed how fuel overages kept getting reassigned between departments. He noticed how vendor invoices were approved at strange hours by executives who claimed they were out of town. He noticed patterns. That was why he survived. Every morning, Isaiah arrived at 6:10 a.m., not 6:00, not 6:15, 6:10. The security guards downstairs knew him by name because the lobby was nearly empty when he arrived. He always carried the same dark leather messenger bag, same gray overcoat in winter, same coffee from the small deli across the street. No one looked twice at him. That helped. The analysts on the 19th floor liked Isaiah, but quietly. Nobody wanted to be too connected to someone Damian clearly disliked. Isaiah never played office politics anyway. He worked through lunch most days. A turkey sandwich, black coffee, spreadsheet windows covering both monitors. There were rumors about him. Some people thought he had been demoted years ago. Others assumed he lacked ambition. A few believed he stayed because he was too timid to leave. The truth was simpler. Isaiah understood exactly what kind of building Vanguard really was, and he understood how dangerous powerful men became when they thought nobody was watching. 3 months earlier, a winter storm had nearly shut down freight movement across Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. Highways closed. Distribution centers overloaded. One routing failure alone could have cost Vanguard $22 million in breached delivery contracts. Damian Whitmore stood in front of the board that Friday and accepted praise for decisive operational leadership. The room applauded him. Isaiah watched from the back beside the presentation screens. What nobody mentioned was that Damian had panicked 6 hours into the storm and disappeared into private executive calls while Isaiah rebuilt the routing structure manually with 3 junior analysts and 2 exhausted dispatch supervisors from Milwaukee. Isaiah stayed awake for 31 straight hours during that storm. He rerouted refrigerated medical shipments through Iowa to bypass interstate closures. He negotiated emergency rail transfers with a carrier in Omaha. He kept 3 hospitals in northern Illinois from losing surgical inventory during a blizzard. Damian received a performance bonus. Isaiah received an email reminder about incomplete compliance training modules. He never complained. That part confused people the most. Most men eventually broke under humiliation, especially public humiliation, but Isaiah absorbed it differently, like weather, like noise, like something temporary. At 7:40 a.m., the 19th floor slowly came alive. Phones ringing, printers warming up, the smell of burnt coffee drifting from the break room. A young analyst named Trevor leaned over Isaiah's cubicle wall. "You see the email from Whitmore's office?" Isaiah kept typing. "No." Trevor lowered his voice automatically, even though Damien wasn't anywhere near the floor. Quarterly numbers meeting got moved up again. "Everybody's freaking out." Isaiah nodded once. Trevor hesitated. "You think layoffs are coming?" Isaiah finally looked up. Trevor was 26, smart, overworked, dark circles under his eyes from 70-hour weeks, too young to already look exhausted by corporate life. "Probably restructuring first," Isaiah said calmly. "Then layoffs." Trevor swallowed hard. Isaiah noticed things like that too. The fear in younger employees, the way they checked emails after midnight, the way they apologized before speaking in meetings. Vanguard rewarded pressure. Pressure made people obedient. Across the building, executives called that efficiency. Around 9:15 a.m., Isaiah received a calendar notification. Confidential internal review session. No sender listed. Conference room 14, B, 11:30 a.m. Isaiah stared at the screen for several seconds. Then he quietly closed the notification. No reaction, no visible concern. But something shifted behind his eyes. For nearly 14 months, Isaiah had been storing copies of internal reports outside company servers. Not because he planned revenge, not because he wanted leverage, because numbers had started changing after approval. Small changes at first, decimal adjustments, timing discrepancies, missing routing penalties, then larger ones. 7-figure forecasting distortions. Vendor contracts redirected through shell subsidiaries. Executive performance metrics inflated before board reviews. The kind of fraud that only worked because nobody believed operational analysts looked closely enough to understand the entire system. Isaiah understood all of it. That was the problem. Around noon, he entered conference room 14B. 3 people were already waiting inside. 2 men from internal audit, and Evelyn Mercer, chief financial officer, mid-50s, sharp posture, silver-framed glasses, calm eyes that rarely revealed emotion. Evelyn closed the folder in front of her as Isaiah entered. "Mr. Russell," she said evenly. Nobody offered coffee. Nobody smiled. One auditor slid a financial statement across the table. Isaiah recognized it instantly. Quarterly Transportation Margin Report. But something was wrong. His name appeared at the bottom beside an electronic approval signature. Authorized by Isaiah Russell. The approval timestamp showed 11:42 p.m. from 6 weeks earlier. Isaiah had been home asleep at that hour. He looked at the signature for a long moment, then at Evelyn Mercer. Her eyes stayed fixed on him carefully, watching, measuring. The auditor spoke quietly. "Mr. Russell, did you authorize these revisions?" Isaiah's face remained calm, but deep in his chest, something cold settled into place, because he finally understood what Damien Whitmore was preparing to do. And for the first time in 14 months, Isaiah realized the situation was moving faster than he planned. The conference room stayed quiet after the question. "Did you authorize these revisions?" Isaiah looked down at the forged approval signature again. Same formatting, same employee credentials, same authorization chain Vanguard used across every finance division. Whoever altered the report understood the internal systems well enough to avoid obvious mistakes. That narrowed the list considerably. Isaiah leaned back slightly in the chair. "No," he said. The answer came calm, flat, certain. One of the auditors exchanged a glance with the other. Evelyn Mercer never moved. Outside the glass walls of conference room 14B, employees crossed the hallway carrying coffee cups and laptops. Phones rang somewhere deeper in the accounting wing. Ordinary office noise. Inside the room, the atmosphere had changed completely. The younger auditor pushed another document toward Isaiah. "Can you explain why your login credentials accessed the forecasting server at 11:42 p.m.? Isaiah studied the timestamp. Then he looked carefully at the access chain underneath. Not the login itself, the routing sequence. That was where mistakes usually lived. "It didn't," Isaiah said quietly. The younger auditor frowned. The log says the VPN relay originated from Executive Network B, Isaiah interrupted. Now Evelyn moved slightly, just enough to show attention. Isaiah tapped the page once with his finger. My access permissions are tied to Operations Network 14. This relay came through executive bypass routing. Silence. The younger auditor looked confused. The older one immediately grabbed the paper again. Isaiah already knew what he would find. Executive Network B had administrative privilege overrides. Only certain senior leadership offices used that routing structure because it bypassed normal overnight authentication delays. Damian Whitmore used it constantly. Isaiah folded his hands together, not defensive, not nervous, just waiting. Evelyn studied him carefully now. There was something unsettling about calm people in moments that should produce panic, especially inside corporate environments built on fear reactions. Most employees rush to defend themselves when accused. Isaiah analyzed systems instead. The older auditor cleared his throat. Why didn't you report these discrepancies earlier? That question mattered more. Isaiah answered honestly. Because I didn't know how far it went yet. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. How long have you suspected financial manipulation? Isaiah paused. He could feel the danger of the room now. Not emotional danger, professional danger, the kind that destroyed careers quietly. He chose precision over safety. 14 months. The younger auditor actually sat back. Evelyn stayed still, but Isaiah noticed her pen stop moving. That mattered. 14 months earlier, Isaiah had noticed routing penalties disappearing from Midwest freight reports before executive reviews. At first, he assumed accounting corrections. Then he noticed the timing. The changes always happened between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., always through executive override permissions, always shortly before board reporting deadlines. That pattern led him deeper. Inflated revenue forecasting, operational losses hidden inside deferred maintenance categories, vendor payments redirected through Shell Logistics contractors in Ohio and Missouri, each discovery connected to another, and every path eventually pointed upward, toward Damian Whitmore's division, toward executive compensation, toward quarterly performance bonuses. Isaiah never confronted anyone directly. That would have been stupid. Men like Damian survived because they controlled narrative before truth had time to organize itself. So Isaiah collected evidence instead, quietly, patiently. At home, he kept encrypted backups on 2 external hard drives hidden inside old storage boxes beneath winter clothes in his apartment closet. Not because he trusted himself, because he no longer trusted the company. Evelyn finally spoke again. You understand the implications of what you're saying. Isaiah met her eyes. Yes. You're accusing senior executive leadership of fraud. No, Isaiah replied calmly. I'm saying the numbers are impossible. That answer lingered in the room longer than the accusation itself would have, because numbers were difficult to intimidate, especially precise ones. Evelyn opened another folder. Inside were printed compensation sheets, executive bonus structures, margin performance graphs. Isaiah recognized them immediately. The transportation margin percentages had been artificially increased across 3 quarters. Not enough to trigger automatic SEC scrutiny, just enough to increase executive incentives. Carefully calculated theft. Evelyn slid the documents toward him. These percentages led to approximately $18.6 million in executive performance compensation. Isaiah nodded once. That sounds right. The younger auditor stared at him. You already calculated the amount I estimated between 17 and 20 million 6 months ago. The room went silent again. That was the moment Evelyn Mercer truly began reevaluating Isaiah Russell, not because he uncovered the fraud, because he had understood the scale long before internal audit caught up. Most analysts specialized narrowly: operations, forecasting, fuel efficiency, vendor chains. Isaiah understood the entire structure. That was rare and dangerous. Evelyn closed the folder slowly. What's your background, Mr. Russell? The question surprised the younger auditor. It didn't surprise Isaiah. Northwestern University, Economics and Systems Analytics, and before Vanguard, McKenna and Pierce Consulting. New York. The younger auditor blinked immediately. Even he knew the name, McKenna and Pierce recruited aggressively from Ivy League finance programs and federal economic advisory groups. Their consultants regularly entered six-figure compensation before turning 30. Evelyn studied him carefully. Why leave Isaiah's expression barely changed, but for a moment his eyes drifted toward the dark window beside the conference room table. Chicago's skyline reflected faintly against the glass. "My mother got sick," he said. Nothing more. No dramatic explanation, no self-pity. But the silence afterward explained enough. Cancer treatments, hospital debt, missed promotions, career collapse. The slow erosion of ambition under personal disaster. Evelyn understood that kind of silence. Isaiah could tell. People who survived long enough in corporate America recognized exhaustion when they saw it. The older auditor spoke carefully. "If these reports are tied to executive fraud, there's a possibility they'll try to assign responsibility downward." Isaiah almost smiled, not because it was funny, because it confirmed what he already knew. Damian Whitmore wasn't preparing defense. He was preparing sacrifice, and Isaiah had just been selected. Evelyn folded her hands together. "There's something else." She pushed forward another document. Merger projections. Projected integration estimates. Executive restructuring proposals. At the top of the page, confidential COO succession strategy. Damian Whitmore's name appeared repeatedly. Isaiah understood immediately. The merger wasn't about company expansion. It was about positioning. If the acquisition succeeded, Damian would likely move into the chief operations officer role within the next fiscal year, which meant the fraud needed to survive at least one more quarter, maybe two. After that, accountability would scatter across new reporting structures and integration chaos, much harder to trace. Isaiah felt something settle heavily in his chest. Not anger, confirmation. Damian wasn't panicking yet because Damian believed the system protected executives who generated profit. Historically, he was right. Evelyn watched Isaiah carefully. "You've been carrying this alone for over a year." Isaiah looked down at the merger papers, then at the forged signature attached to his name. "They needed someone invisible," he said quietly. The younger auditor shifted uncomfortably, because everybody in that room suddenly understood the same thing. Isaiah Russell had not been selected randomly. He had been selected because almost nobody important inside Vanguard truly saw him, and invisible people made excellent scapegoats. Evelyn finally stood. "We'll continue this tomorrow." Isaiah nodded once and gathered nothing from the table. No paperwork, no notes. Everything important was already stored elsewhere. As he reached the conference room door, Evelyn spoke again. "Mr. Russell." He stopped. "If this escalates publicly, are you prepared for what happens next?" Isaiah looked at her for a long moment, then toward the moving city outside the windows. Chicago traffic crawling through rain-dark streets below, people rushing home, lights turning on across distant buildings. A normal evening continuing while careers quietly approached collapse. When Isaiah answered, his voice stayed low. "I think," he said carefully, "it already started." Back upstairs on the executive floor, Damian Whitmore was laughing loudly behind glass walls while preparing for Friday's quarterly division meeting, and Isaiah suddenly understood something very clearly. Damian intended to destroy him in public before anyone else could ask questions privately. Friday morning arrived cold and gray over downtown Chicago. Rain streaked across the glass walls of Vanguard Freight Systems, while employees moved through the lobby carrying umbrellas and laptop bags. The building felt sharper than usual, tighter. People sensed tension before leadership announcements the same way animals sensed storms. On the 19th floor, almost nobody spoke above a whisper. Quarterly executive meetings were already unpleasant under normal conditions. But after the rumors spreading through accounting and compliance during the past 48 hours, employees understood something bigger was happening. Isaiah Russell arrived at 6:10 a.m. like always. Same gray overcoat, same leather messenger bag, same coffee from the deli downstairs. Routine mattered, especially when pressure increased. He walked through the operations floor calmly, while clusters of analysts lowered their voices as he passed. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others looked at him with quiet sympathy. That was worse. Trevor stood beside the printer pretending to organize reports. "You okay?" he asked carefully. Isaiah set his bag down beside his desk. I'm fine. Trevor nodded, though he clearly didn't believe him. Everyone had heard about the internal audit meeting by now. Corporate buildings leaked information faster than damaged pipelines, especially bad information. Across the office floor, Slack notifications flashed nonstop. People speculated privately about investigations, restructuring, possible layoffs. Nobody mentioned Damian Whitmore directly. Fear trained people efficiently. At 8:25 a.m., Isaiah received a message from Executive Administration. Quarterly Performance Review. 41st Floor Executive Conference Room Mandatory Attendance. He read it once, then closed the screen. No visible reaction. But deep down, Isaiah already knew what kind of meeting this would become. He spent the next hour reviewing freight recovery reports while rain hammered softly against the windows. At 9:47 a.m., the executive elevators opened onto the 41st floor. The conference room stretched nearly the entire length of the building's eastern side. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Chicago River and the steel-gray skyline beyond it. 83 employees filled the room gradually. Department heads, regional managers, finance teams, operations analysts, several board representatives sat near the rear beside legal counsel. Isaiah noticed Evelyn Mercer immediately. She sat perfectly still near the center of the long table, reviewing documents through silver-framed glasses. 2 seats away from her sat Charles Holloway, older than the others, white-haired, calm, watching everything. Isaiah recognized him from internal board reports, but had never spoken to him directly. Charles Holloway built freight companies before most of Vanguard's executives graduated college. Men like him rarely attended routine meetings personally. That mattered. Isaiah took a seat near the back corner, far from the executive section, far from visibility, exactly where he preferred to be. At 10 o'clock sharp, Damian Whitmore entered the room, confident stride, tailored charcoal suit, perfectly measured smile. He carried no papers. Executives like Damian preferred appearing above details. The room quieted instantly. Damian stood at the head of the conference table beneath the massive presentation screens. Let's begin. The first 30 minutes followed normal patterns. Revenue growth projections, expansion metrics, fuel cost stabilization, corporate language layered carefully over operational stress fractures. Isaiah watched quietly while Damian presented inflated transportation recovery numbers Isaiah knew were manipulated. No hesitation, no nervousness. That told Isaiah something important. Damian still believed he controlled the room. Then the presentation shifted. A new slide appeared. Midwest Shipping. Failures Operational Review. Isaiah felt the atmosphere change immediately. Several managers glanced toward him automatically. Damian sighed dramatically. You all know the past quarter presented significant operational challenges. His tone carried practiced disappointment, the kind executives used when preparing public blame. We experienced avoidable routing delays, fulfillment instability, and reporting inconsistencies that cost this division millions. Damian paced slowly beside the screen. Then he stopped and looked directly at Isaiah. The room became perfectly still. Unfortunately, Damian said carefully, some employees were simply not capable of handling the responsibilities assigned to them. Isaiah didn't move, didn't speak, didn't look away. Damian smiled faintly. Predators often mistook silence for weakness. Our senior operations analyst, Isaiah Russell, repeatedly failed to provide accurate forecasting oversight despite multiple correction opportunities. Murmurs spread quietly around the room. Trevor stared down at the table immediately. Isaiah could almost feel the fear radiating through the younger analysts nearby. Nobody interrupted executives publicly at Vanguard. Nobody, Damian continued smoothly. Operational incompetence becomes especially dangerous when combined with poor accountability. Another slide appeared. Isaiah's employee profile, salary information, internal review metrics. The humiliation was deliberate, calculated. Several employees shifted uncomfortably. Even people accustomed to Damian's behavior recognized this was excessive. Damian folded his hands behind his back. Some individuals are simply not built for leadership environments. His eyes locked onto Isaiah again. Frankly, Isaiah, you should have stayed buried in spreadsheets where the damage stayed smaller. A few nervous laughs escaped from the executive side of the room. Nobody else joined. Isaiah remained completely still, but internally his mind was moving fast now, not emotionally, strategically. He noticed Evelyn Mercer stop taking notes. He noticed Charles Holloway leaning back silently with his fingers pressed together. He noticed legal counsel watching Damien instead of Isaiah. Important details. Damien walked closer now, close enough that everyone in the room could feel the imbalance of power. "You know what your biggest problem is?" Damien asked. Isaiah finally answered. "No." Damien smiled wider. "You confuse competence with value." Silence. Cold. Heavy. Rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking the river 41 floors below. Damien picked up a document from the conference table. Revised financial authorization forms. The forged reports. Isaiah recognized them immediately. "Here's what's going to happen," Damien said. "You're going to sign the corrected reporting documents acknowledging operational responsibility." He placed the papers directly in front of Isaiah, and then we move forward professionally. The room watched without breathing. Isaiah looked down slowly at the papers. His forged electronic signature appeared across multiple sections already. Prepared, packaged, finalized. Damien wanted public surrender, public blame, a clean corporate sacrifice. Isaiah understood that now completely. Damien lowered his voice slightly. "Sign it." Isaiah looked carefully through the pages. Every number connected back toward manipulated executive reporting structures. If he signed, the fraud chain would collapse downward directly onto him, and Damien knew it. Isaiah lifted his eyes calmly. "No." The word landed softly, but the effect inside the room was immediate. Damien's expression hardened instantly. "You don't seem to understand the situation." Isaiah's voice stayed level. "I understand it exactly." For the first time all morning, real anger flashed across Damien's face. Not performance, not executive theater, actual fury. Because quiet men became dangerous when they stopped cooperating publicly. Damien straightened sharply. "You are refusing direct executive instruction. I'm refusing false reporting." The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody looked away now. Damien stared at Isaiah for several seconds, then laughed once. Short, sharp, humiliating. False reporting. He turned toward the room dramatically. "This is exactly the kind of delusion I'm talking about." He pointed directly at Isaiah. "This man has spent years hiding behind analysts while better people carried this division." Isaiah noticed Trevor looking physically sick now. Several employees near the back stared at the table instead of the confrontation. Fear again. Always fear. Damien's voice rose harder. "You are a liability to this company." He slammed the report onto the table. Water glasses rattled sharply. Then Damien looked toward the doorway. Security. Two security officers appeared almost immediately from outside the conference room, prepared in advance. Isaiah noticed that too. "Escort Mr. Russell out of this meeting." The room went dead silent. One of the security officers approached carefully, almost apologetically. Isaiah stood slowly, no argument, no scene, just the sound of his chair sliding back across polished flooring. He picked up his messenger bag calmly, while 83 employees watched him. Damien shook his head with visible disgust. Pathetic. Isaiah paused near the doorway. For a brief moment his eyes moved across the room, past frightened analysts, past silent managers, past executives pretending comfort. Then toward Evelyn Mercer. She was already looking directly at him, and beside her Charles Holloway hadn't looked away once. Isaiah stepped into the hallway with security beside him. The conference room doors closed heavily behind him, but only seconds later another sound followed, the door reopening. Isaiah turned slightly. Evelyn Mercer walked into the hallway carrying a thin black folder. "Mr. Russell," she said quietly, "come with me." The hallway outside the executive conference room felt colder than the meeting itself. Muted gray carpet, soft recessed lighting, rain sliding down the windows overlooking the Chicago River 41 floors below. Isaiah Russell stood beside the wall while the two security officers waited awkwardly several feet away. Neither man looked comfortable. One adjusted his tie repeatedly. The other avoided eye contact entirely. They both understood what had happened inside that room. Public humiliation always left residue behind. Evelyn Mercer approached without rushing. Calm steps. Black folder held against her side. The conference room doors remained shut behind her now, but Damian Whitmore's raised voice still carried faintly through the walls as the quarterly meeting continued without Isaiah. Evelyn stopped in front of him. "Come with me." Not a request. Isaiah followed her down the executive hallway in silence. Most offices on the 41st floor had glass walls facing the skyline. Senior leadership liked visibility when people were looking upward at them. Evelyn's office was different. Wood-paneled, minimalist. No family photographs. No corporate awards displayed on shelves. Only organized stacks of financial reports and a large framed map of Vanguard's freight routes across the Midwest. She closed the door behind them. The city noise disappeared instantly. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Isaiah remained standing. Evelyn walked toward the window slowly and looked down at the river traffic below. "Damien thinks fear solves every problem," she said, finally. Isaiah said nothing. Evelyn turned back toward him. "He made a mistake humiliating you publicly." Isaiah's expression stayed neutral. "No," he replied quietly. "He made a calculation." That answer lingered in the office for several seconds. Because it was true. Men like Damian Whitmore rarely lost control emotionally. Public humiliation was strategy. Establish dominance early, destroy credibility publicly. Make resistance look pathetic. Corporate systems protected confidence more than truth. Isaiah understood that better than most. Evelyn opened the black folder and placed several printed documents across her desk. Internal audit summaries, compliance notices, financial variance reports. The deeper investigation had already started. "Sit down, Mr. Russell." Isaiah sat carefully across from her. Evelyn removed her glasses slowly. For the last 6 months, she said the board has suspected financial manipulation inside Midwest operations. Isaiah listened without reacting. "We lacked direct linkage," she continued. "Every discrepancy stopped one layer short of executive accountability." Isaiah nodded once. "That was intentional." Evelyn watched him carefully. "You seem remarkably unsurprised by all of this." Isaiah looked toward the rain-dark skyline outside. "People stealing money usually don't leave obvious trails." Evelyn almost smiled at that. Almost. She sat down across from him. "Then tell me something honestly." Isaiah waited. "How much do you actually know?" The question mattered. Isaiah understood that immediately. There were different kinds of truth inside corporations. The truth people suspected, the truth people could prove, and the truth people survived long enough to speak aloud. He reached slowly into his messenger bag. Evelyn's eyes narrowed slightly. Isaiah removed a small black USB drive and placed it carefully on the desk between them. No dramatic movement, no speech attached to it, just a quiet object suddenly changing the atmosphere inside the room. Evelyn looked at the drive, then at him. "What is this?" Isaiah folded his hands calmly. 14 months. The office became very still. Evelyn picked up the drive slowly. "What's on it?" "Everything I could verify," meaning Isaiah answered carefully. "Executive approval chains, vendor transfers, routing manipulations, deleted forecasting revisions, compensation inflation structures, internal emails." Evelyn stared at him. "How many people have access to this?" "Just me." "You made copies?" "Yes." Where Isaiah met her eyes evenly. "If something happens to me professionally, legally, or financially, several encrypted releases go public automatically." Silence. Not threatening, not emotional, just preparation. Evelyn leaned back slightly in her chair now. For the first time since this began, Isaiah noticed genuine surprise break through her control, not because of the evidence, because of the patience behind it. Most employees reacted emotionally once they realized leadership intended to sacrifice them. Isaiah had spent over a year building survival structures quietly. That changed how dangerous he appeared. Evelyn rotated the USB drive slowly between her fingers. "You planned for this?" Isaiah shook his head. "No." He glanced briefly toward the conference room direction down the hallway. "I prepared for it." Another silence settled between them. Outside, thunder rolled softly somewhere over Lake Michigan. Evelyn stood and crossed toward the espresso machine near the side cabinet. Coffee? Isaiah nodded once. She handed him a black ceramic mug several moments later. No sugar, no cream. Somehow she had guessed correctly. You know the board may still protect Damien, Evelyn said carefully. Isaiah took one sip before answering. I know. He's profitable. I know. He has relationships with investors. Isaiah nodded again. Also true. Evelyn studied him with increasing curiosity now. Most people facing career destruction displayed panic by this stage. Isaiah displayed fatigue, controlled fatigue, like someone who stopped expecting fairness a long time ago. Then why keep gathering evidence, she asked quietly. Isaiah looked down into the coffee for several seconds before answering. When my mother got sick, he said calmly, the hospital billing department kept losing records. Evelyn remained silent. We were charged 3 times for the same treatments at one point. His voice stayed level. No self-pity, just memory. I learned something during that year. He lifted his eyes slowly. If you don't document everything, powerful systems rewrite reality for you. The office went completely quiet, because Evelyn Mercer understood exactly what kind of man sat across from her now. Not an ambitious employee, not a revenge-driven subordinate, a survivor. Those were different things entirely. She returned to her desk carefully. You realize once this reaches the board formally, there's no controlling where it goes. Isaiah nodded. That's already happening. Evelyn opened her laptop and inserted the USB drive. For several moments only, the sound of keyboard clicks filled the office. Then her expression changed. Slightly, but enough. Folders. Organized by quarter, by department, by authorization chain, time-stamped evidence, cross-referenced financial reports, metadata backups, even deleted email recovery logs. Isaiah hadn't simply collected evidence. He had built a map. Evelyn opened one file after another silently. Vendor shell companies, bonus distribution irregularities, internal approval overrides. Eventually, she stopped clicking. The room felt smaller now somehow. How long did this take you? About 14 months. You did this alone? Yes. Evelyn exhaled slowly. Then she asked the question Isaiah already knew was coming. Why didn't you go directly to the board? Isaiah answered immediately. Because I didn't know who they'd protect. That answer sat heavily in the office. Because it was honest. Corporate loyalty often flowed toward money first, truth second. Sometimes never. Evelyn removed the USB carefully and closed the laptop. There's an emergency board session Friday morning. Isaiah stayed still. Charles Holloway pushed for it personally after internal audit escalated the forecasting discrepancies. Isaiah remembered the older board member watching silently during the meeting, observing everything, not reacting once during Damien's performance. Evelyn folded her hands. Damien thinks today strengthened his position. Isaiah looked toward the rain-covered windows again. Traffic moved slowly below through the gray streets of Chicago, people hurrying beneath umbrellas. Normal lives continuing while entire corporate structures quietly destabilized overhead. He needed me publicly discredited before the board started asking questions, Isaiah said. Evelyn nodded once. Yes. Neither of them spoke for several seconds after that. Finally, Evelyn stood. I need to secure these files properly. Isaiah rose calmly. As he picked up his messenger bag, Evelyn looked at him carefully. One more thing. Isaiah paused near the office door. If this goes where I think it's going, she hesitated briefly. The company may need someone who actually understands how the operation functions. Isaiah's expression didn't change, but internally something tightened. Because for the first time since this began, he realized Evelyn Mercer wasn't just investigating fraud anymore. She was thinking about what happened after collapse. And that was far more dangerous. By Monday morning, Vanguard Freight Systems no longer felt stable. The building still looked the same from outside. Glass towers reflecting Lake Michigan, executive cars lining the private entrance, employees crossing the marble lobby with coffees balanced beside security badges. But underneath the surface, the company had started splitting quietly along invisible cracks. People sensed investigations before official announcements ever happened. Systems slowed down first, then approvals, then executive tempers. Isaiah Russell noticed all three before 8 a.m. When he reached the lobby at 6:10, the overnight security supervisor greeted him differently, too carefully. "Morning, Mr. Russell. Not casual anymore. Measured." Isaiah nodded once and continued toward the elevators. The first sign appeared on the 19th floor. His employee badge failed at the operations entrance. A sharp red light flashed. Access denied. Several nearby analysts looked up immediately. Isaiah waited calmly while the system reset. The second attempt worked. Partial restriction, not termination. Interesting. Inside the office floor, conversations lowered the moment he appeared. Slack notifications stopped. Monitors switched screens. Nobody wanted visible association with someone potentially connected to executive fraud investigations. Fear spread efficiently in corporate environments, especially when leadership stayed silent. Isaiah sat at his desk and powered on his aging Dell laptop. 23 unread emails waited. Most were operational reports. 3 came from compliance. 1 came from human resources requesting temporary review coordination. Another came from executive administration revoking his access permissions to forecasting approval systems. Expected. What caught Isaiah's attention was the final email. From legal hold compliance subject record preservation notice. That changed things. Legal hold notices only activated when internal investigations moved beyond routine audit procedures. Somebody upstairs had escalated formally. Across the office floor, Trevor approached carefully, holding a paper cup of coffee. "You hear about accounting?" Isaiah looked up. "No." Trevor lowered his voice automatically. 2 people from compliance boxed up files on 32 this morning." Isaiah accepted the coffee. "Thanks." Trevor stayed beside the cubicle wall nervously. "They're saying Whitmore's division got flagged by legal." Isaiah said nothing. Trevor studied him for a moment. "You already knew, didn't you?" Isaiah took one sip of coffee before answering. "I knew something was coming." That answer unsettled Trevor more than denial would have. Because Isaiah didn't sound afraid, he sounded prepared. Around 9:20 a.m., the executive elevators opened again. Damian Whitmore stepped onto the operations floor unexpectedly. That alone made people tense immediately. Executives rarely visited analyst sections unless they wanted something visible. Damian walked confidently through the aisles in a tailored navy suit, smiling at employees like Friday's confrontation had never happened. Performance. Everything with Damian was performance. Several department managers followed behind him, silently carrying tablets and folders. Isaiah remained seated. Damian stopped directly beside his desk. The entire floor became silent without looking silent. Nobody turned fully toward them, but everybody listened. Damian smiled pleasantly. "Isaiah." Isaiah looked up calmly. Damian. That tiny violation of hierarchy registered instantly. No title, no Mr. Whitmore, just Damian. A few nearby analysts froze completely. Damian's smile tightened almost invisibly. "I heard you've been speaking with internal audit," Isaiah answered carefully. "They contacted me." Of course they did. Damian rested one hand casually on the cubicle wall. "Funny thing about investigations?" His tone remained light. "People tend to damage themselves trying to appear useful." Isaiah held his gaze quietly. No reaction. That irritated Damian more, because intimidation depended on visible discomfort. "You've worked here a long time," Damian continued. "I'd hate to see confusion ruin your career." Isaiah noticed several employees pretending intensely to work now. Nobody breathed normally around executive confrontations. "I'm not confused," Isaiah said calmly. Damian's jaw tightened slightly. Just slightly. Then the smile returned. "Well," he said smoothly, "that's reassuring." He stepped away from the cubicle, then paused. Without turning back, he added quietly, "Careful who you trust, Isaiah," and walked away. The moment he disappeared into the elevator, noise slowly returned across the operations floor. Phones ringing again. Keyboard clicks. Whispers. Trevor looked pale. What the hell was that? Isaiah stared at the spreadsheet still open on his monitor. A warning. But internally, Isaiah understood something more important. Damien was nervous now, not panicked, but nervous enough to come downstairs personally. That meant pressure above him was increasing. Around noon, Isaiah received another system notification. Several archived routing files had been remotely deleted overnight. He checked the authorization logs immediately. Executive override permissions again. But this time, the deletion attempts failed. Legal hold protections had frozen the servers already. Interesting. Someone was trying to clean evidence before the investigation deepened. Isaiah copied the logs quietly onto an encrypted drive, then continued working. That was what unsettled people most about him. The calm, hours after public humiliation, days into executive investigations, possible career destruction hanging over him. And Isaiah still reviewed freight routing data like nothing had changed. But beneath that calmness, his mind remained active constantly, tracking, connecting, watching patterns shift. At 2:15 p.m., a message appeared from Rachel Bennett, Warehouse Operations Manager, Joliet Distribution Center. Isaiah respected Rachel. Most executives didn't. Rachel was direct, union-friendly, and impossible to intimidate publicly. Damien hated people like that. Her message was short. Heard about Friday. Be careful. People are moving files. Isaiah read it twice, then deleted the notification. Rachel rarely exaggerated. If warehouse supervisors noticed unusual document activity, the panic had spread deeper than leadership realized. At 4:40 p.m., Isaiah headed toward the parking structure. Rain still covered the city in gray reflections and blurred headlights. Chicago traffic crawled through wet streets below the tower. Halfway across the lobby, someone called his name. Mr. Russell. Isaiah turned. An older man stood near the reception desk wearing a dark wool coat. Charles Holloway, the board member from Friday. Up close, he looked even older than Isaiah expected. Late 60s, perhaps. Deep lines around the eyes, calm posture, but nothing about him felt weak. Charles extended one hand. Isaiah shook it once. Firm, direct. Walk with me, Charles said. Not a request. Outside, cold rain drifted sideways across Wacker Drive while black SUVs pulled through evening traffic. Charles walked without rushing beneath the building awning. You know why most companies fail? He asked suddenly. Isaiah stayed quiet. Executives start believing presentations matter more than operations. Charles looked toward the river. They forget trucks still need roads, warehouses still need workers, systems still need people who understand them. Isaiah listened carefully. Charles turned toward him fully now. I've reviewed some of your operational recovery reports from the storm last winter. Isaiah said nothing. You saved this company nearly $25 million in 48 hours. Still no response. Charles almost smiled. And you never asked for credit. Rain tapped softly against the sidewalk around them. Traffic lights reflected red across the wet streets. Finally, Charles asked the real question. If Vanguard collapsed tomorrow morning? He studied Isaiah carefully. Would you know how to keep it running? Isaiah answered without hesitation. Yes, not arrogant, not emotional, just factual. Charles nodded once slowly, as though confirming something privately. Then he reached into his coat pocket and handed Isaiah a business card. Four Seasons Hotel Chicago, private dining level. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Isaiah looked at the card. What is this? Charles adjusted his gloves calmly. A conversation. Then he paused before adding, and Mr. Russell. Isaiah looked up. The board is beginning to realize Damian Whitmore may not be the company's biggest asset. A long silence followed that statement, because both men understood the implication beneath it. Charles turned and disappeared into the rain-dark crowd moving along Wacker Drive. Isaiah remained standing beneath the awning holding the card, while cold wind rolled through downtown Chicago. For the first time since this began, he realized something dangerous. The investigation was no longer just about exposing fraud. People upstairs had started thinking about replacement. The Four Seasons Chicago overlooked the city like it existed above ordinary consequences. Soft piano music drifted through the lobby. Polished marble reflected warm chandelier light. Executives and wealthy tourists moved quietly between restaurants and elevators, while staff members spoke in calm, measured tones designed to make problems feel temporary. Isaiah Russell arrived exactly at 6:52 p.m. Gray overcoat, dark button-down shirt, no tie. He looked like a man coming from work, not a man preparing to meet one of the most influential board members in the transportation industry. The hostess guided him toward a private dining room overlooking Michigan Avenue. Charles Holloway was already seated near the window. No assistants, no legal team, no performance. Just an older man reviewing a thin stack of operational reports beneath dim lighting. Charles looked up as Isaiah approached. "You're early, so are you." A faint smile touched the corner of Charles's mouth. "Good." Isaiah sat across from him quietly. The room itself felt intentionally understated. Dark wood walls, minimal decoration, expensive without trying to appear expensive. Men like Charles Holloway no longer needed displays of wealth to prove status. A server arrived for drink orders. Charles requested bourbon. Isaiah ordered black coffee. The server left. Charles leaned back slightly in his chair. "You know, he said Damian Whitmore thinks charisma is operational strategy." Isaiah remained silent. Charles tapped one finger against the reports on the table. He's not the first executive to make that mistake. Outside the windows, Chicago traffic crawled beneath glowing streetlights while cold rain streaked down the glass. Charles studied Isaiah carefully. "You've spent years making yourself invisible." It wasn't a question. Isaiah answered honestly. "In companies like Vanguard, invisible people survive longer." Charles nodded slowly. "That's true." Then his expression hardened slightly. "But survival and leadership aren't the same thing." Isaiah understood immediately. This meeting wasn't about evidence anymore. It was evaluation. Charles opened one of the reports. "The board reviewed your storm recovery routing structure from last January." He slid several pages across the table. Isaiah recognized them instantly. Emergency rerouting matrices, fuel stabilization plans, rail transfer authorizations, documents he created during the Midwest blizzard while Damian Whitmore performed executive interviews on CNBC about corporate resilience. "You designed this in less than 11 hours, Charles said." "Yes." "With no executive authorization." "Yes." "You rerouted $74 million in freight assets manually." Isaiah took one sip of coffee. "Yes." Charles watched him carefully now. "Do you understand how unusual that is?" Isaiah looked down briefly at the reports. "I understand the operation. That's not what I asked." Silence settled between them. Charles leaned forward slightly. "Most executives understand presentations. Some understand finance. A few understand logistics." He tapped the paperwork again. "You understand systems." Isaiah said nothing, because there was no useful answer to that. Charles continued. "People think transportation companies move freight." His voice remained calm. "They don't." He pointed toward the city outside. "They move timing." Isaiah listened carefully. Timing keeps hospitals supplied, factories operating, grocery stores stocked. Once timing collapses, everything collapses. Charles studied him closely. "You understand timing." Isaiah finally spoke. "My mother's chemotherapy treatments were delayed twice because of supply chain disruptions." Charles became very still. "She died 6 months later." No emotion entered Isaiah's voice. That almost made the sentence heavier. The noise of the restaurant seemed farther away suddenly. Charles sat back slowly, and for the first time that evening he stopped evaluating Isaiah purely as an employee. Now he understood where the obsession with operational precision came from. Some people chased efficiency for profit, others because failure already buried someone they loved. Those people worked differently. Charles folded his hands together. "Do you know why I requested this meeting personally?" Isaiah answered truthfully. "No. Because everyone else on the board is focused on exposure." Charles glanced toward the city lights. Lawsuits, shareholder panic, SEC inquiries, public relations. Then he looked directly at Isaiah. "I'm focused on whether this company survives the next 12 months. The sentence landed heavily, because Isaiah suddenly realized how serious the situation truly was. Not scandal serious, collapse serious. Charles continued calmly. "Vanguard's Midwest division handles nearly 40% of our national routing volume." He slid another report forward. Three major clients are already discussing withdrawal contingencies if this investigation expands publicly. Isaiah reviewed the names quickly. Pharmaceutical distribution, automotive manufacturing, medical supply transport. If even one of those contracts collapsed suddenly, the company would bleed cash immediately. Charles watched his reaction carefully. You see the problem? Yes. Good. Charles took a slow sip of bourbon. Now answer my question honestly. Isaiah waited. If Vanguard lost half its executive leadership tomorrow morning, Charles's eyes locked onto him. Would you know how to stabilize operations? The question sounded hypothetical. It wasn't. Isaiah understood that immediately. He looked down at the reports spread across the table. Forecasting failures, routing instability, vendor corruption exposure, labor dissatisfaction. Most executives would panic because they viewed operations through presentations and investor calls. Isaiah viewed them through moving systems, warehouses, drivers, fuel contracts, dispatch timing, human exhaustion. He answered carefully. Yes. Charles didn't blink. How? Isaiah leaned slightly forward for the first time all evening. First, isolate Midwest freight recovery from executive restructuring. Charles listened silently. Keep frontline operations separated from leadership investigations. If workers think the company is collapsing, routing performance drops immediately. Charles nodded once. Isaiah continued. Freeze non-essential expansion spending for 90 days. Continue. Renegotiate fuel contracts before winter pricing increases. Shift long-haul overflow through Omaha rail hubs temporarily. Protect medical freight lanes first because contract penalties are highest there. Charles's expression remained unreadable. But internally, something had shifted. Isaiah could see it. Not because the plan impressed him emotionally, because it was practical, grounded, built from operational reality rather than executive language. Isaiah continued calmly. Warehouse turnover is another problem. Charles looked up immediately. Explain. Employees stopped trusting leadership months ago. Isaiah folded his hands. They know reports are manipulated even if they don't understand how. He paused briefly. People always know when systems become dishonest. The older man stared at him quietly. Most executives underestimate that. They underestimate workers, Isaiah corrected. Silence. Charles leaned back slowly now. Outside rain continued sliding across the city while traffic lights reflected red and gold against wet pavement below. Finally, Charles spoke again. You know what's interesting about Damian Whitmore? Isaiah said nothing. He thinks intimidation creates authority. Charles swirled the bourbon glass once, but intimidation only works on people afraid of losing something. His eyes lifted toward Isaiah carefully. You already lost most of what mattered to you years ago, didn't you? The question hung in the room quietly. Isaiah looked toward the window, toward Chicago stretching endlessly beneath the storm-dark sky. My marriage ended while my mother was in treatment. Charles remained silent. I sold almost everything I owned paying medical debt. Isaiah's voice stayed calm. After that, he stopped briefly. Corporate humiliation stopped feeling particularly important. The honesty of the sentence changed the atmosphere again, because Charles Holloway suddenly understood exactly why Damian Whitmore couldn't control Isaiah Russell. Fear had limited power over men who already survived worse things outside the office. Charles checked his watch slowly, then reached into his coat pocket and removed a folded document. He slid it carefully across the table. Isaiah unfolded it. Emergency Board Session. Friday, 8 a.m., Executive Conference Room. Charles watched him read it. The board wants operational contingency plans prepared before the meeting. Isaiah looked up. You think it'll go that far? Charles held his gaze steadily. I think Damian Whitmore is running out of places to hide. Then he paused. And I think the board is starting to ask a different question now. Isaiah waited. Charles's voice lowered slightly. If he falls... The older man tapped the reports one final time. Who actually knows how to run this company? The room became completely silent after that. Because for the first time since this entire situation began, Isaiah realized something dangerous. People upstairs were no longer simply investigating him. They were measuring him. Isaiah Russell's apartment overlooked an alley behind River North. Not the skyline, not the river, just brick walls, fire escapes, and the orange glow of a flickering street lamp outside the kitchen window. The apartment itself was small but organized with almost uncomfortable precision. Bookshelves arranged by subject, bills filed inside labeled folders, two monitors on a narrow desk beside the living room wall. Everything in its place. Control mattered to Isaiah, especially after years when life gave him none. It was nearly 11:40 p.m. when he unlocked the apartment door after leaving the Four Seasons. Rain still tapped against the windows while distant sirens echoed through downtown Chicago. He placed his messenger bag carefully beside the desk, removed his coat, rolled up his sleeves, and began working. No television, no music, just the hum of electronics and the steady rhythm of keyboard clicks filling the room. On the left monitor, Vanguard operational data scrolled through warehouse performance reports and route stabilization models. On the right, Isaiah built something entirely different, a survival structure. If the board removed Damian Whitmore, the Midwest division would destabilize immediately. Executives like pretending leadership transitions were smooth. They weren't. Not inside logistics. One mistake in freight timing could trigger chain reactions across multiple states within hours. Isaiah understood that better than anyone inside Vanguard, so he built the recovery plan carefully. Fuel containment projections, vendor renegotiation structures, emergency labor retention incentives, alternative rail routing systems, every detail connected to another, every weakness mapped. Outside, the rain deepened. Chicago traffic faded slowly into distant white noise. By 1:15 a.m., empty coffee cups covered half the desk. Isaiah barely noticed. He worked with the same calm concentration he used during winter storms and operational crises. But underneath that focus, memories moved quietly through him. Not dramatic memories. The dangerous kind. The ordinary ones. His mother asleep beneath thin hospital blankets at Northwestern Memorial. The smell of antiseptic in late-night oncology waiting rooms. Insurance representatives placing him on hold while chemotherapy bills kept arriving. Isaiah stopped typing briefly, just for a moment. The apartment remained silent around him. 3 years earlier, he had been living in Manhattan consulting for McKenna and Pierce, corporate restructuring, logistics optimization, Fortune 500 contracts, 80-hour weeks, six-figure bonuses, private airport lounges. He remembered those years vaguely now, not proudly, mostly as exhaustion. Then his mother got sick, stage 4 ovarian cancer. Everything after that happened quickly. Medical leave requests, emergency flights back to Chicago, consulting clients reassigned, partnership tracks disappearing quietly. His marriage collapsed somewhere in the middle of hospital visits and unpaid bills. Claire lasted longer than most people would have, but eventually she stopped recognizing the man Isaiah had become. Tired, distracted, emotionally absent. The divorce papers arrived 2 months before his mother died. Isaiah never blamed her. Some forms of grief isolated people long before funerals happened. He returned to work 6 weeks after the burial. Not because he recovered, because debt didn't care about mourning. That was how he eventually arrived at Vanguard Freight Systems. Lower salary, lower visibility, less prestige, but stable, predictable, quiet. Isaiah resumed typing. Rows of operational forecasts filled the screen, projected warehouse staffing deficits, client retention vulnerabilities, dispatch overflow contingencies. He built the plan the same way he survived everything else. Carefully, one controlled piece at a time. At 2:40 a.m., his phone buzzed softly beside the keyboard. Rachel Bennett. He answered immediately. "You're awake," Rachel said. Warehouse noise echoed faintly behind her voice. Forklifts. Metal impacts. Night shift operations. "So are you," Isaiah replied. Rachel exhaled sharply. "Joliet's a mess tonight." "What happened?" 2 corporate compliance teams showed up unannounced. Isaiah's eyes narrowed slightly. "At the warehouse." "Yeah." Rachel lowered her voice. "They're pulling freight authorization records from the last 8 months." That confirmed it. The investigation had spread beyond headquarters now. Isaiah leaned back slowly in his chair. How bad? Rachel hesitated. Bad enough that people are nervous. Outside the apartment window, thunder rolled faintly over the city. Rachel continued, "Some managers think federal investigators are coming. Not yet. You sound pretty sure." Isaiah glanced toward the operational maps glowing across both monitors. "Internal legal review comes first." Rachel went quiet briefly. Then she asked the real question. "You think Whitmore survives this?" Isaiah answered honestly. "I don't know." But internally, he already suspected the truth. Men like Damian Whitmore survived ordinary scandals. This was becoming larger than scandal. Rachel spoke again. "You know they're saying you started this." Isaiah almost smiled. "People always need a visible villain. You bothered to defend yourself yet?" "No." Rachel laughed softly. "That's either wisdom or insanity. Probably both." Another forklift alarm sounded behind her. "Listen," Rachel said carefully. "Warehouse crews trust you." Isaiah stayed silent. "They remember the storm last winter. You stayed on calls with dispatch for almost 2 straight days while executives disappeared." He looked down at the spreadsheets covering his desk. "They remember who actually helped." The sentence lingered quietly between them. Respect from frontline workers mattered differently than executive approval. Harder to earn, harder to fake. Rachel lowered her voice one final time. "Be careful tomorrow." Then the call ended. Isaiah stared at the dark phone screen for several seconds, then returned to work. By 3:50 a.m., the recovery strategy exceeded 100 pages. Not presentation slides. Actual operational structure. Labor protection sequencing. Vendor stabilization schedules. Emergency client communication protocols. Isaiah printed nothing. Everything remained digital, time-stamped, backed up. At 4:35 a.m., exhaustion finally settled visibly across his face. He walked into the kitchen and poured cold water into a glass. The apartment felt strangely small tonight, or maybe the future did, because for the first time since this began, Isaiah could see the shape of what might happen next. If Damien fell publicly, Vanguard would panic. Executives would protect themselves first. Investors would pressure the board. Clients would question stability. And somewhere inside all of that chaos, the company would need someone who actually understood operations deeply enough to keep everything moving. That realization disturbed him more than the investigation itself. Isaiah never wanted power. Power attracted men like Damian Whitmore, men who confused authority with worth. Isaiah only wanted systems that worked honestly. At 5:12 a.m., his phone buzzed again. A text message. Unknown number. "The board wants you upstairs at 8. No signature. No explanation." Isaiah stared at the message silently while pale morning light slowly crept across the apartment walls. Outside, rain continued falling over Chicago. The city was waking up. Traffic beginning again, trains moving, deliveries starting, normal life continuing. But inside Vanguard Freight Systems, something enormous was already shifting, and Isaiah realized he had reached the point where preparation alone might no longer protect him. Soon he would have to walk directly into the center of the collapse. Friday morning felt unnaturally quiet inside Vanguard Freight Systems. The lobby still gleamed under white marble lighting. Security guards still scanned employee badges. Coffee carts still filled the air with burnt espresso and steamed milk. But the building had lost its rhythm. Employees spoke carefully now. Executives moved faster. Phones rang longer before people answered. Corporate fear had a sound if someone listened closely enough. Isaiah Russell arrived at 7:12 a.m. after less than 90 minutes of sleep. Gray overcoat damp from rain, messenger bag resting against one shoulder. His face looked more tired than usual, but his movement stayed calm, controlled. The same security guard from earlier in the week nodded toward him uneasily. "Morning, Mr. Russell?" Isaiah nodded once. As he stepped toward the elevators, he noticed something unusual immediately. 2 black SUVs parked outside the executive entrance. Not company vehicles. Government plates. Interesting. The elevator ride to the 41st floor felt longer than normal. When the doors opened, the executive hallway stood almost completely empty. No assistants chatting. No administrative staff moving between offices. Just silence. At the far end of the corridor, Evelyn Mercer waited beside the conference room doors. She looked exhausted. Silver-framed glasses, dark navy suit, a stack of folders held tightly against her chest. You're early, she said quietly. So are you. Evelyn almost smiled. Almost. But the tension around her eyes remained. How bad is it? Isaiah asked. She studied him carefully before answering. Worse than Wednesday. That confirmed enough. Evelyn lowered her voice. Damien arrived an hour ago with outside legal counsel. Isaiah nodded once. Expected. 3 board members flew in overnight. Which ones? Halpern, Ruiz, Holloway. That mattered. Especially Holloway. Charles Holloway did not travel for corporate theater. He traveled when structures were about to break. Evelyn looked toward the closed conference room doors. They're waiting for final audit summaries. Isaiah adjusted the strap of his messenger bag slightly. Am I here as a witness? Evelyn hesitated. That depends on how the morning goes. The answer stayed with him as she opened the doors. The executive conference room looked different today, not physically, psychologically. The long glass table remained polished perfectly beneath recessed lighting. Chicago's skyline still stretched across the windows beyond. Rain clouds still darkened the river below. But now the room carried weight. Legal binders covered half the table, compliance files stacked beside laptops, board members speaking quietly near the windows, and at the far end sat Damian Whitmore. Perfect suit, perfect posture, perfect smile. But Isaiah noticed something immediately. Damian's right hand tapped lightly against the armrest. Tiny movement, repeated every few seconds. Nervousness. Charles Holloway sat near the center of the table, reviewing documents silently. He looked up once as Isaiah entered. No greeting, just observation. Evelyn guided Isaiah toward an empty chair near the middle section, not the back corner anymore. Interesting. As Isaiah sat down, Damien finally spoke. Well, he said smoothly, this should be entertaining. Nobody reacted. That changed the atmosphere more than anything else. Earlier in the week, Damien controlled rooms through personality and intimidation. Now people avoided engaging him emotionally at all. Board investigations stripped performance away from executives very quickly. Charles Holloway closed the folder in front of him. Let's begin. His voice carried no theatrics, just authority. An attorney from internal compliance stood first and distributed updated financial summaries across the table. Isaiah reviewed the numbers quietly. The damage had expanded significantly overnight. Hidden operational losses, manipulated vendor contracts, executive compensation irregularities. Projected exposure now exceeded $30 million. Damien leaned back in his chair calmly. These accusations rely heavily on interpretation. Charles looked toward him evenly. Do they? Damien spread his hands slightly. Complex organizations produce accounting irregularities. Evelyn Mercer finally spoke. Accounting irregularities don't forge authorization signatures. Silence. Damien's eyes shifted toward Isaiah instantly. There it was, blame direction. Still trying. Damien folded his hands carefully. Isaiah Russell had direct forecasting access for nearly 2 years. Charles looked toward Isaiah. Mr. Russell? Isaiah met his gaze calmly. Yes, walk us through the routing authorization discrepancies. The room became completely still. This was no longer accusation theater. Now it was evidence. Isaiah opened his messenger bag slowly and removed a thin black laptop. No dramatic gestures, no speeches, just preparation. He connected the device to the conference room monitor system. Several executives exchanged glances immediately. Prepared people made nervous systems worse. The large screens illuminated behind him. Authorization logs filled the display. Timestamp chains. Network routing structures. Executive access histories. Isaiah stood beside the screens calmly. The forged approvals originated through executive network bypass routing, he explained. One board member interrupted immediately, meaning Isaiah zoomed into the access architecture. Standard employee permissions route through Operations Network 14. He highlighted several chains. These approvals bypassed standard authentication protocols entirely. Damien shifted slightly in his chair. Isaiah continued. Only senior executive offices possess these override permissions. Charles Holloway watched silently. Isaiah pulled up another screen. Metadata timestamps appeared. Access origin points. Encrypted server trails. Every movement documented. Here, Isaiah said calmly, The authorization appears under my credentials. He highlighted the timestamp. But the relay originated from an executive terminal on the 41st floor. Another board member leaned forward. Can you prove that? Isaiah opened another file. Security badge access logs, parking garage entry timestamps, building surveillance authentication records. At the time these approvals occurred, my employee badge never entered the building. Silence spread heavily across the room. Because now the evidence stopped sounding theoretical. It sounded precise. Damien's attorney finally spoke. This could still indicate compromised employee credentials rather than executive misconduct. Isaiah nodded once. Yes. Then he changed the screen again. Vendor payment structures appeared, shell companies, transfer patterns, executive bonus escalations. Except the manipulated reporting directly increased executive compensation tied to Midwest operational performance. Another silence, sharper now. Isaiah highlighted the payment chains. These shell vendors received redirected freight maintenance payments before transferring funds into performance incentive structures tied to senior leadership bonuses. Charles looked toward Damien slowly. Would you like to explain that Damien's smile had disappeared entirely now? This is circumstantial. Evelyn Mercer opened another folder. No, she said quietly. It's corroborated. She slid several printed email chains across the table. Isaiah recognized them instantly. Internal deletion requests. Late-night authorization overrides. One message carried Damien Whitmore's direct executive credentials. The room changed immediately after that. Not emotionally, structurally. Isaiah could feel it happen. Board members stopped evaluating possibility. Now they evaluated liability. Damien sensed it too. His voice hardened suddenly. You're making a mistake. Nobody answered. Damien looked directly at Isaiah now. This man spent 14 months collecting internal company data behind leadership's back. Charles replied before Isaiah could speak. And if he hadn't, silence. Damien's jaw tightened. You're seriously trusting an analyst over executive leadership. Charles leaned back slowly. I'm trusting evidence. That sentence ended something invisible inside the room. Damien realized it too. For the first time since this began, real panic flickered behind his eyes. Brief, but undeniable. He looked toward Isaiah sharply. So what now? No one answered immediately. Damien laughed once, short, harsh. You fire me and replace me with him. The question hung heavily over the conference room, and nobody in the room dismissed it immediately. That was the moment Damien Whitmore finally understood how much power he had already lost. Charles Holloway closed the folder in front of him carefully, then looked toward Damien. Please step outside while the board deliberates. Silence filled the room. Damien stared at him. You're serious? Charles never changed expression. Yes. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Damien stood slowly from the conference table. His face remained controlled now, too controlled, the dangerous kind of anger. He gathered nothing, not his papers, not his legal notes. As he walked toward the exit, he stopped beside Isaiah briefly, close enough for only nearby executives to hear. This isn't over. Isaiah met his gaze calmly. No, he said quietly. It probably just started. Damien stared at him for one long second, then walked out of the conference room. The doors closed behind him heavily, and suddenly, for the first time all week, the room felt like it could finally breathe. But Isaiah noticed something else immediately. Several board members were no longer looking at the investigation files. They were looking at him. The conference room stayed silent after Damien Whitmore left. Not ordinary silence, the heavy kind. The kind that settled after structures cracked and everyone inside realized they had just witnessed the beginning of something irreversible. Rain drifted across the windows overlooking the Chicago River while board members reviewed documents in low voices. Attorneys whispered beside stacks of compliance reports. Someone near the far end of the table rubbed both hands slowly across their face, like exhaustion had arrived all at once. Isaiah Russell remained seated quietly near the center section. No triumph. No satisfaction. Just stillness. Because he understood something most people didn't. Exposing corruption rarely felt victorious in real life. Mostly, it felt expensive. Charles Holloway closed another folder and looked toward Isaiah. Mr. Russell. Isaiah met his gaze. We'll need approximately 30 minutes. Isaiah nodded once and stood calmly. Evelyn Mercer stepped beside him immediately. I'll show you somewhere private. They walked through the executive hallway together while muted conversations continued behind the conference room doors. The 41st floor felt strangely hollow now. Assistants avoided eye contact. Phones rang unanswered inside executive offices. Several department directors stood in clusters, whispering near the elevators before instantly stopping when Isaiah passed. News traveled fast inside corporate towers. Fear traveled faster. Evelyn led him into a smaller conference room near legal compliance. No windows. Just a polished oak table, recessed lighting, and a coffee machine humming quietly against the far wall. You can wait here. Isaiah placed his messenger bag beside one of the chairs. Evelyn hesitated near the door, then asked softly, How are you holding up? The question almost sounded personal. Isaiah looked at the untouched coffee cups stacked beside the machine. I'm tired. Evelyn studied him for a second, then nodded once. I know. After she left the room, became completely still. Isaiah sat alone beneath the low lighting while time moved strangely around him. He checked his watch once. 8:42 a.m. The board deliberations had started. Somewhere beyond those walls, people were discussing liability exposure, shareholder reactions, executive restructuring, public fallout, and possibly him. That part still felt unreal. Isaiah leaned back slowly and closed his eyes for a moment. Fatigue pressed heavily behind them now. Not physical exhaustion alone. Years of pressure, years of watching dishonest people rise faster because they understood performance better than responsibility. He remembered Damien humiliating warehouse supervisors during earnings calls, remembered junior analysts crying quietly in stairwells after executive reviews, remembered nights rebuilding freight systems while executives collected bonuses for leadership excellence. Corporate systems rewarded visibility, not usefulness. Men like Isaiah survived underneath that structure. Usually unnoticed, usually temporary, but now the structure itself had started collapsing. At 9:11 a.m., his phone buzzed. Trevor. Isaiah answered quietly. You okay? Trevor asked immediately. Background office noise echoed through the line. Phones, printers, whispers. I'm fine. That's not what people are saying downstairs. Isaiah stared at the blank wall across the room. What are they saying? Trevor lowered his voice instinctively. That Whitmore got pulled from the executive floor. Interesting. So rumors already started. Isaiah... Trevor hesitated. Did you really take him down? The question lingered, because it revealed how people misunderstood situations like this. They imagined revenge, battles, victories. Isaiah answered honestly. No. Silence. Then Trevor asked softly, Then what happened? Isaiah looked down at his hands resting calmly on the conference table. The truth stopped staying buried. Another silence. Trevor exhaled slowly into the phone. People downstairs are scared. I know, they think layoffs are coming. Isaiah closed his eyes briefly. Probably. But if Whitmore's gone... Trevor stopped himself, the sentence unfinished. But Isaiah understood it anyway. If Damien Whitmore was gone, then what came next? Nobody inside Vanguard knew. That uncertainty frightened people more than investigations. Isaiah ended the call quietly a few moments later. At 9:37 a.m., the conference room door finally opened. Evelyn Mercer stepped inside first. Behind her came Charles Holloway. Neither looked emotional. That was somehow worse. Charles carried a thin black folder beneath one arm. Mr. Russell. Isaiah stood immediately. Charles motioned toward the table. Sit down. No small talk. No transition. The older man remained standing for several seconds before finally speaking. The board has concluded preliminary review. Isaiah listened carefully. Damien Whitmore is being placed on immediate administrative suspension pending formal investigation. Not surprising. What mattered was what came next. Charles continued calmly. External forensic auditors will begin full review procedures this afternoon. Evelyn remained silent beside him. Isaiah nodded once. I understand. Charles studied him carefully. No, he said quietly. I don't think you do. That changed the atmosphere instantly. Charles opened the black folder slowly. Inside sat several typed documents, executive transition forms, operational authority transfers. Isaiah recognized them immediately. And suddenly, his heartbeat changed for the first time all week. Not panic, something heavier. Charles placed the documents on the table. The board voted unanimously to remove Whitmore from operational authority, effective immediately. Isaiah stayed silent. Then Charles added, and by majority vote, he paused briefly. We are appointing you interim division president of Midwest operations. The room became completely still. Even the quiet hum of fluorescent lighting suddenly felt distant. Isaiah stared at the paperwork without touching it. He genuinely thought he misheard the sentence at first. Evelyn watched him carefully. No reaction came. That unsettled her slightly. Most people would have shown shock immediately. But Isaiah's mind worked differently. It moved through consequences first: operational risk, visibility, pressure, exposure. Finally, he looked up. You're serious? Charles nodded once. Yes. Isaiah stood slowly from the chair and walked toward the blank wall near the coffee machine. Not dramatic, just movement. He needed distance from the table for a second. Outside the room, phones continued ringing faintly somewhere beyond the hallway walls. The company kept moving. Freight still moved. Warehouses still operated. Drivers still crossed state lines. Meanwhile, inside this small room, his entire life had just shifted direction without warning. Isaiah turned back toward them carefully. There are senior vice presidents with 20 years of executive leadership. Charles answered immediately. Most of them helped create this mess. Evelyn finally spoke. The board doesn't trust presentation people anymore. Isaiah looked toward her. They trust operational stability. Charles stepped closer now. You understand the infrastructure better than anyone we've reviewed. Isaiah shook his head slightly. That doesn't make me an executive. Charles's expression hardened. Good. Silence. The older man folded his hands behind his back. People who want authority usually shouldn't have it. Isaiah looked down again at the transition document spread across the table. Interim Division President. The title felt absurd attached to his name. He thought about his small apartment in River North, his old Toyota Camry, his years quietly surviving beneath executives who barely remembered he existed. Now those same executive floors would answer to him. The irony almost felt cruel. Evelyn crossed her arms carefully. There's another issue. Isaiah looked up. Employees know something happened this morning. Charles nodded once. The department needs immediate leadership communication before rumors spiral. Isaiah already understood. Panic inside logistics systems spread operational damage quickly. If workers believed Vanguard leadership was collapsing, performance metrics would drop within hours. Drivers would hesitate. Warehouse supervisors would freeze decisions. Managers would protect themselves instead of solving problems. Charles checked his watch. You'll address the department at 1 p.m. Isaiah stared at him. Today? Yes. The word landed hard, not because public speaking frightened him, because he understood symbolism. 4 days earlier, security escorted him out of that same conference room like disposable staff. Now the board wanted him standing at the front of it. Evelyn studied his expression carefully. You don't have to become Damian Whitmore. Isaiah looked toward the rain-dark skyline beyond the hidden walls, then back toward the transition paperwork. No, he said quietly. I think the company already had enough of that. Charles Holloway finally allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile. Then he pushed the document slightly closer across the table. Welcome to executive leadership, Mr. Russell. But Isaiah wasn't listening to the title anymore, because somewhere deep down, another realization had already started forming. Taking down Damian Whitmore had been the easy part. Now he had to keep the company from collapsing afterward. At 12:47 p.m., Isaiah Russell stood alone outside the executive conference room, the same room where Damian Whitmore publicly humiliated him 4 days earlier. Same polished glass walls, same skyline view stretching across downtown Chicago, Same long conference table beneath cold, recessed lighting. But now the hallway outside carried a different kind of silence. Not fear, uncertainty. Employees moved carefully through the executive floor, pretending not to stare at him, while clearly staring anyway. News had already spread through the building. Damian Whitmore suspended. Emergency board intervention. Executive restructuring. Nobody knew the full truth yet, but corporate rumors moved faster than official announcements ever could. Isaiah adjusted the cuff of his dark shirt calmly. No new suit, no executive makeover, no sudden transformation. He still looked like the same quiet operations analyst people ignored near the back corner of the 19th floor. That mattered to him. Inside the conference room, more than 90 employees waited. Department heads, regional managers, finance teams, operations analysts, warehouse supervisors patched in remotely from Milwaukee, Joliet, Indianapolis, and St. Louis. Everyone expected something dramatic. Corporate leadership changes usually arrived with rehearsed speeches and polished executive messaging. Isaiah had prepared none of that. Evelyn Mercer stepped beside him quietly. "You ready?" Isaiah looked through the glass walls into the room. Trevor sat near the middle section, staring at the table nervously. Several managers whispered urgently beside laptops. A few executives looked openly irritated, especially the senior vice presidents who clearly believed they deserved the interim position instead. No, Isaiah answered honestly. Evelyn almost smiled. "That's probably a good sign." Then she opened the doors. The room fell silent immediately. Isaiah stepped inside. For a brief moment, nobody moved, because the image itself felt strange. 4 days earlier, security escorted him out of this room like a disgraced employee. Now board members stood near the windows while Isaiah walked toward the head of the conference table. Several executives avoided eye contact entirely. Others watched him carefully, trying to understand what kind of leader he would become. Isaiah reached the front slowly. No dramatic pause. No performance. He rested one hand lightly against the table and looked across the room. Tired faces. Anxious faces. Defensive faces. People bracing for layoffs. Corporate employees always learn to fear leadership transitions first. Isaiah understood that. So he started there. Before anything else, he said calmly, "There will be no immediate layoffs." The room changed instantly. Not loudly, but physically. Several people relaxed without realizing it. Trevor actually looked up. A warehouse supervisor on the video screen leaned back slowly in relief. Isaiah continued, "Operational stability matters more right now than appearances. No executive language, no motivational tone, just clarity." He noticed some of the senior executives exchange glances immediately. They already disliked him. Good. That simplified things. Isaiah folded his hands loosely in front of him. The board has placed Midwest Division leadership under temporary restructuring review. Careful wording. No direct public accusations yet. Legal was probably listening to every sentence. During that process, our priority is keeping operations stable for employees, drivers, warehouse teams, and clients. A vice president near the far end interrupted immediately. "What exactly does restructuring review mean?" Isaiah recognized him. Martin Keller, regional finance executive, close to Damian, aggressive in meetings, weak under pressure. "It means compliance investigations are ongoing," Isaiah answered evenly. Martin leaned back with visible irritation. "And you're running them now? No. Then why are you standing there?" The tension inside the room tightened instantly. Some executives watched carefully now, expecting Isaiah either to snap emotionally or retreat weakly. That was how corporate hierarchies usually worked. Dominance or collapse. Isaiah chose neither. "The board appointed me interim division president this morning," he said calmly. Silence. Martin stared at him. Several employees looked genuinely shocked hearing it spoken aloud publicly for the first time. Isaiah continued before reactions could spread. "I didn't ask for the position." That sentence mattered. He saw it land differently across the room, especially among frontline managers, because most people inside Vanguard were exhausted by ambitious executives pretending power itself was leadership. Isaiah looked toward the operations teams connected remotely on screen. Over the next 72 hours, no warehouse staffing reductions will occur. Rachel Bennett appeared on one of the monitors from Joliet, arms crossed. watching carefully. Isaiah continued. Overtime approvals previously frozen by executive review are reinstated effective immediately. Now the room really shifted. Warehouse supervisors started exchanging looks. Operations analysts stopped staring at the table. Even some middle managers looked stunned, because Damian Whitmore spent years cutting overtime aggressively to inflate performance margins before quarterly reports. Isaiah knew exactly how much damage that caused on the ground. Fatigued workers, missed routing corrections, unsafe scheduling, people making expensive mistakes because leadership wanted prettier spreadsheets. A senior HR executive spoke carefully. Those reinstatements will impact quarterly labor costs significantly. Isaiah looked directly at her. So does employee exhaustion. Silence again. But different this time. Not fearful. Listening. Isaiah moved slowly around the conference table while speaking. No dramatic pacing, just controlled movement. The company spent years optimizing appearance instead of operations. Several executives stiffened visibly. Good. We're done doing that. Another silence spread through the room. Isaiah noticed something important then. People weren't watching him like executives usually watched leaders. They were studying him cautiously, like workers checking whether a bridge would actually hold weight before stepping onto it. That trust would take time. He understood that. A logistics manager from Indianapolis raised his hand carefully. What happens if clients pull contracts? Real fear behind the question. Isaiah answered immediately. They won't if service stability improves. How can you know that? Because clients care about delivery performance more than executive press releases. A few quiet laughs spread across the room. Small, tired, but real. The atmosphere loosened slightly for the first time all week. Isaiah noticed Evelyn Mercer observing silently near the rear wall now, watching reactions carefully, measuring the room. A younger analyst finally spoke from near the back. What about the ethics complaints? Isaiah looked toward her. The woman seemed nervous, even asking. Probably because Vanguard's internal ethics system had quietly buried complaints for years. Isaiah nodded once. Effective today, an independent reporting channel will be established through external compliance review. Several employees visibly reacted to that because they understood what it meant immediately. No more internal suppression. No more executives filtering complaints before investigations. One senior executive interrupted sharply. You're opening the company to legal exposure. Isaiah looked directly at him. The company already exposed itself. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. The executive said nothing else. Isaiah glanced around the room again, and suddenly he noticed something strange. People were calmer now. Not because the situation improved, because clarity reduced fear. For years, Vanguard leadership controlled employees through uncertainty. Threats, image management, political pressure. Isaiah wasn't offering inspiration. He was offering predictability. In operations that mattered more. He checked the time briefly. 1:38 p.m. Then he said the sentence nobody expected. I'll remain on the 19th floor. Several executives blinked. Martin Keller frowned openly. What? My office stays where it is. Martin laughed once. You're division president now. Isaiah nodded slightly. Yes. So move upstairs. Isaiah looked around the room carefully before answering. I can't understand operational problems from behind glass walls. The sentence landed harder than any speech could have, because everyone inside that room understood exactly who those glass walls represented. Isaiah gathered the few notes resting near the front table, then paused. One more thing. The room quieted again immediately. If anyone in this company believes retaliation, intimidation, or document destruction will protect them, his voice stayed calm. It won't. No anger, no threats. That somehow made it heavier, because everyone knew he wasn't bluffing. Isaiah stepped away from the head of the table. No applause followed, no dramatic leadership moment, just people sitting silently while the reality settled slowly over them. The quiet analysts they ignored for years now controlled the entire division, and deep down, many of them realized something unsettling. He understood the company far better than the executives ever had. As employees slowly began leaving the conference room, Isaiah noticed Evelyn approaching him through the crowd. Her expression had changed slightly, concern mixed with calculation. "There's another problem," she said quietly. Isaiah looked at her. Evelyn lowered her voice further. "We found evidence that several other executives may be connected to the fraud structure." Isaiah stayed still, but internally something tightened again, because that meant Damian Whitmore had never been working alone. And the deeper the investigation went, the more dangerous the company itself was about to become. By Monday morning, the news had escaped the building. Vanguard Freight Systems appeared on CNBC before sunrise. A scrolling headline moved beneath financial market coverage. Midwest executive suspended amid internal fraud investigation. The stock dropped 11% before the opening bell. By 9:30 a.m., it had fallen another 6%. Inside headquarters, panic spread faster than the actual facts. Investors flooded executive lines demanding explanations. Regional managers requested emergency guidance. Warehouse supervisors worried about payroll stability. Clients began calling directly instead of routing through account representatives. Corporate systems always look strongest right before fear entered them. Then everything started shaking at once. Isaiah Russell stood near the operations floor windows on 19, watching rain drift across downtown Chicago while listening to 3 simultaneous updates through wireless earbuds. Milwaukee dispatch delays. Indianapolis staffing shortages. A medical supply client threatening contract review. He hadn't slept properly in 4 days. And now the real work had finally begun. His old desk remained exactly where it always had been. Same corner, same aging Dell monitors. Same gray coffee mug beside routing reports. Executives hated that. 3 different assistants had already approached him about moving upstairs into Damian Whitmore's former office suite. Isaiah refused every time. He understood something executives forgot quickly. Distance damaged judgment. The higher people moved above operations, the less truth reached them. Trevor approached carrying a stack of printed reports. "You're trending on LinkedIn." Isaiah barely looked up from the routing screen. "That sounds terrible." "It is." Trevor placed the reports down carefully. "Business blogs are calling you the analyst who took down Whitmore." Isaiah exhaled slowly through his nose. Exactly what he didn't want. Public narratives simplified complicated situations into heroes and villains because audiences preferred clarity over truth. But this wasn't revenge. It was structural failure. And structural failures rarely ended cleanly. Trevor lowered his voice. "Media vans are outside." Isaiah finally looked up. "How many? 4 that I counted." "Interesting. Too fast. That meant somebody leaked internally before official statements were finalized." Isaiah's eyes narrowed slightly. "Who has access to board communications?" Trevor blinked. "What? The leak?" Isaiah said calmly. "It came from somewhere." Trevor stared at him for a moment. That was the unsettling thing about Isaiah. Even during chaos, his brain stayed operational, always tracking systems instead of emotions. Before Trevor could answer, Rachel Bennett's face appeared on the operations monitor from Joliet Distribution Center. Warehouse noise echoed behind her, forklifts moving, metal impacts, workers shouting instructions. Real work, not corporate theater. "You seeing this mess?" Rachel asked immediately. "Yes." "Drivers are nervous." Isaiah turned fully toward the screen. "How bad?" "Bad enough that rumors are spreading faster than dispatch updates." Rachel crossed her arms. "They think the company's collapsing." Isaiah understood the danger instantly. In logistics, fear itself disrupted performance. Workers second-guessed decisions. Drivers hesitated. Supervisors delayed routing approvals. Tiny slowdowns multiplied into major failures. "We need communication packets sent to every distribution center within the hour," Isaiah said immediately. Rachel nodded. "Already drafting them." That made him pause slightly. "You started before I asked." Rachel shrugged. "Someone around here has to think ahead." Trevor almost smiled quietly beside the desk. Isaiah returned attention to the monitor. "Keep overtime active. No labor reductions. Stabilize confidence first." Rachel pointed toward him through the screen. "That's why workers trust you." Then the connection ended. Trevor looked genuinely confused afterward. "You know warehouse managers personally," Isaiah returned to the reports. I know operations. No, Trevor said carefully. That's not the same thing. Isaiah didn't answer. Because Trevor was partially right. Most executives viewed warehouses as numbers. Isaiah remembered names: night shift supervisors, dispatch coordinators, drivers who stayed awake 30 hours during winter storms. That difference mattered now. At 10:14 a.m., Evelyn Mercer appeared beside his desk carrying a tablet and 3 legal folders. Several analysts nearby immediately pretended not to watch. Conference room, she said quietly. Isaiah stood. The smaller operations meeting room felt tense before the conversation even started. Evelyn placed the folders on the table. We have resistance. Isaiah sat slowly. From who senior leadership? Expected. Evelyn opened the first folder. Martin Keller, Regional Finance. 2 additional vice presidents. Another executive from vendor management. All connected through approval structures tied to Damien's compensation network. Isaiah reviewed the names silently. Not surprising. Fraud systems rarely belong to one person. They required silence from multiple layers. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. Several executives are pressuring the board to limit investigation scope. Why? They're claiming broader exposure could destroy investor confidence. Isaiah almost smiled at that. Executives always discovered concern for company stability once their own positions became vulnerable. And the board? Evelyn hesitated briefly. Divided. That mattered. Charles Holloway might support operational transparency, but other board members cared primarily about stock recovery. Isaiah leaned back slowly. They want controlled damage. Yes. Outside the conference room walls, phones rang non-stop across the operations floor. Pressure everywhere. Evelyn studied him carefully. You don't seem surprised. I'm not. She crossed her arms. Most people would panic under this level of exposure. Isaiah looked toward the hallway through the glass wall. Most people still think this is about Damien. Evelyn stayed quiet. Isaiah folded his hands calmly. It's about a culture that rewarded manipulated performance for years. The sentence settled heavily between them, because it was true. Damien Whitmore wasn't the disease. He was a symptom of what Vanguard became. Evelyn finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. Can the company survive this? Isaiah answered honestly. Yes, then paused, but not comfortably. A notification buzzed across Evelyn's tablet. She checked it immediately. Her expression tightened. What another problem? She turned the screen toward him. A financial news article had just gone live online. Vanguard. Interim executive linked to internal fraud review. Isaiah read the headline once, then the subheading. Anonymous sources suggest newly appointed interim division president Isaiah Russell may have known about financial irregularities for over a year before reporting them. Trevor, standing near the doorway, looked stunned. That's bullshit. Isaiah stayed calm. No anger, just analysis. Timing's deliberate. Evelyn nodded immediately. They're trying to tie you to the fraud before public trust settles. Who leaked it, unknown. But Isaiah already suspected. Executives cornered by investigations usually chose survival over loyalty, and if they couldn't save themselves completely, they tried contaminating everyone around them. Trevor looked nervous now. What happens if the board believes this? Isaiah stood slowly from the table. They probably already expected it. Evelyn studied him carefully. You really prepared for everything, didn't you? Isaiah looked down at the article again. No. He grabbed his jacket calmly. I just learned a long time ago that truth moves slower than manipulation. Then he headed toward the door. Evelyn followed immediately. Where are you going? Isaiah stopped briefly in the hallway. To keep operations running. The answer frustrated her slightly. The media is attacking you publicly. Yes. You don't care. Isaiah looked toward the operations floor where analysts rushed between phones and routing screens while freight systems across the Midwest kept moving minute by minute. Drivers still need dispatch approvals, he said quietly. Warehouses still need staffing decisions. Then he added, panic doesn't stop trucks from crashing into each other. That sentence lingered behind him as he walked back onto the operations floor. Employees looked up immediately, watching, measuring, trying to decide whether leadership was collapsing again. Isaiah returned calmly to his old desk. Same chair, same monitors, same quiet man everyone once ignored. But now the pressure around him had changed completely. Because somewhere inside Vanguard Freight Systems, powerful people had realized something dangerous. Isaiah Russell wasn't collapsing under public pressure the way they expected, and that made him much harder to control. By Tuesday morning, Isaiah Russell had become a national business headline. Not because people understood the situation, because public scandals demanded recognizable faces. Financial blogs called him the insider analyst. Cable news panels debated whether he was a whistleblower or a participant. Social media reduced 14 months of evidence collection into viral opinions written by strangers who never stepped inside a freight warehouse in their lives. Outside Vanguard headquarters, media vans lined Wacker Drive beneath gray Chicago skies. Reporters waited near the executive entrance, hoping to capture photographs of frightened executives walking too quickly. The stock dropped another 8% before noon. And somewhere inside the building, someone kept leaking information strategically. Isaiah noticed the pattern immediately. Only selective details reached the press. Enough to damage trust. Never enough to expose the full structure. That meant experienced people were controlling the leaks. People protecting themselves carefully. At 7:05 a.m., Isaiah sat alone at his desk reviewing overnight dispatch reports, while CNBC played silently on a muted monitor nearby. A business anchor pointed toward Isaiah's employee photo displayed beside headlines about internal fraud investigations. Trevor looked sick watching it. This is insane. Isaiah barely glanced at the screen. Turn it off. Trevor muted the television entirely. Around them, the operations floor moved nervously through another unstable morning. Analysts whispered, managers avoided eye contact. Several employees openly checked job listings between freight reports. Fear had fully entered the building now. Isaiah understood the danger of that better than the media did. Once employees emotionally disconnected from operational systems, mistakes multiplied. And mistakes inside logistics killed companies faster than bad headlines ever could. Rachel Bennett called at 7:32 a.m. Warehouse alarms echoed loudly behind her voice. You seen the news? Yes. They're saying you knew about the fraud for over a year. I did. Rachel went quiet for half a second, then laughed sharply. Well, honesty's refreshing. Isaiah leaned back slightly in his chair. I knew enough to document patterns, not enough to accuse people publicly. Media doesn't care about distinctions like that. No. Rachel lowered her voice. Workers are split right now. That mattered. How split older crews trust you? Isaiah listened carefully. The younger ones think leadership's eating itself alive. She paused. And honestly, they're not completely wrong. Isaiah looked across the operations floor. Employees moved faster now, more anxious, more defensive. Corporate collapse had started becoming emotionally real. We need transparency, Rachel said. Isaiah stayed silent. Not another executive statement, she continued. Actual transparency. That word stayed with him after the call ended. Transparency. Vanguard leadership spent years weaponizing uncertainty. Executives controlled information because confusion protected authority. Isaiah understood now that the company couldn't survive another layer of hidden messaging. At 9:10 a.m., Evelyn Mercer appeared beside his desk carrying a legal folder in visible exhaustion. You need to see this. They moved quickly into one of the smaller operations conference rooms. Evelyn closed the door harder than usual. Not anger, pressure. She dropped several printed articles across the table. Anonymous sources indicate Interim Division President Isaiah Russell maintained access to fraudulent reporting structures while failing to notify regulators. Another headline, Board under fire for promoting possible insider. Isaiah read silently. No visible reaction. But internally, he understood the strategy completely now. Whoever leaked the information wasn't trying to save Damian Whitmore anymore. They were trying to poison public trust in the replacement. If Isaiah became contaminated publicly, the board might retreat into damage control and narrow the investigation. Classic containment strategy. Evelyn crossed her arms tightly. Board members are getting nervous. Which one's Halpern specifically? Not surprising. Victor Halpern represented investor interests first. Stability mattered more to him than truth. He wants a public distancing statement. Isaiah looked up slowly. From me, from the company, meaning they were considering sacrificing him too if pressure kept building. Isaiah almost expected it. Corporate systems protected themselves first, always. Evelyn studied him carefully. You really aren't angry? Isaiah folded the articles neatly together. Anger wastes time. That's not normal. No, he agreed quietly. It's practiced. Silence settled briefly between them. Then Isaiah asked the important question. What are warehouse conditions? Evelyn blinked. That's your priority right now, yes. She exhaled slowly. Operations are unstable but functioning. Client withdrawal risk. 3 major accounts reviewing contingency plans. Isaiah nodded once. Still survivable. Barely. Then he made the decision. We need a town hall. Evelyn frowned immediately. A public one. Yes. With media pressure this high, Isaiah met her eyes calmly. Especially now. The idea clearly unsettled her. Corporate executives avoided unscripted transparency the same way politicians avoided live microphones. Too dangerous. Too unpredictable. But Isaiah understood something differently. People already sensed dishonesty. Silence would only confirm it. Evelyn sat down slowly across from him. And what exactly are you planning to say? Isaiah looked toward the glass wall overlooking the operations floor. The truth. That answer almost made her laugh from exhaustion. You realize legal will hate that sentence. Legal already hates me. For the first time all morning, Evelyn smiled briefly. Small, tired, real. The town hall was scheduled for 2 p.m. Every regional office connected remotely. Warehouse supervisors patched in nationwide. Operations teams crowded conference rooms and break areas watching through internal live streams. Even executives attended, mostly because nobody trusted what Isaiah Russell might say publicly anymore. At 1:56 p.m., Isaiah stood alone behind the stage curtain inside Vanguard's internal auditorium. No speech notes, no teleprompter, just silence. He could hear the low murmur of hundreds of employees waiting beyond the curtain. Evelyn approached quietly beside him. You can still keep this controlled. Isaiah looked toward the stage entrance. They already think I'm hiding something. You did hide something. He nodded once. Yes. Evelyn waited. Isaiah's voice lowered slightly. I didn't know who was safe to trust. The honesty of that sentence lingered heavily between them, because it explained more about Vanguard's culture than any audit report ever could. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly. Someone signaled from stage management. Time. Isaiah walked out slowly into the light. Hundreds of faces looked back at him. Employees, managers, warehouse teams on screens, fear everywhere, not hatred, fear. Isaiah stood at the podium quietly for several seconds before speaking. I know what people are saying. No corporate introduction, no branding statement, just directness. They're saying I knew about financial manipulation for over a year. Silence filled the auditorium instantly. Isaiah rested both hands lightly against the podium. That part is true. Several people shifted visibly. Executives near the side wall stiffened immediately, but Isaiah continued before reaction spread. I saw patterns that didn't make sense. Numbers changing after approvals. Operational losses disappearing before board reviews. His voice stayed calm. I documented what I could verify. A warehouse supervisor on one of the remote screens leaned forward carefully. Isaiah looked across the room slowly. I didn't go public immediately because I didn't know how deep the system went. Another silence. Heavy now. Real. Then Isaiah said the sentence nobody expected. And honestly, he paused briefly. I didn't believe the company would protect the truth. The room changed after that. Not loudly. Emotionally. Because for the first time since the scandal started, someone in leadership had spoken honestly about fear inside the company. No executive jargon, no polished messaging, just truth. Isaiah continued quietly. People ask why I stayed. His eyes moved across operations staff analysts, warehouse workers, watching remotely. I stayed because the work still mattered. He glanced toward the logistics maps displayed on the side screens. Medical shipments still mattered. Driver safety still mattered. Warehouse workers still mattered. The room stayed completely silent. Even executives stopped shifting uncomfortably now, because none of this sounded like corporate damage control. It sounded personal, real. Then suddenly movement appeared near the rear auditorium entrance. Several heads turned. A tall older man entered beside two federal investigators wearing dark overcoats. Charles Holloway stepped quietly aside as the man approached the center aisle. Evelyn's expression changed immediately. Recognition. Isaiah narrowed his eyes slightly. The older man carried a leather folder beneath one arm and moved with calm precision. Then Charles's voice cut through the silence. Ladies and gentlemen, he looked toward Isaiah briefly. This is Daniel Mercer, former federal financial crimes investigator. The room became absolutely still, and Isaiah realized instantly something enormous had just changed. Because federal investigators didn't appear publicly unless the situation had already moved far beyond internal scandal. The auditorium remained silent long after Daniel Mercer entered the room. Employees stared toward the former federal investigator standing beneath the dim overhead lights beside Charles Holloway. Even the executives near the side walls stopped pretending calm, because everyone understood what federal involvement meant. Internal scandals could still be managed. Federal investigations belonged to a different world entirely. Isaiah Russell stepped slightly away from the podium, while Daniel Mercer approached the stage slowly carrying the leather folder beneath one arm. No performance, no dramatic expression, just the steady posture of someone who spent decades walking into rooms where powerful people suddenly realized they were no longer protected. Charles spoke quietly into the microphone. Mr. Mercer assisted federal financial crime investigations for 23 years. A low murmur moved through the audience. Daniel opened the folder calmly. Then he looked directly toward the employees. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence connected to Vanguard Freight Systems. His voice carried the kind of authority that didn't require volume. Based on what I've seen, he paused briefly. Mr. Isaiah Russell's documentation likely prevented the destruction of critical financial evidence. The room shifted instantly. Executives stiffened. Warehouse supervisors on the remote screens exchanged glances. Trevor actually leaned back in visible relief. Daniel continued. The evidence trail suggests coordinated reporting manipulation involving multiple executive-level participants. No corporate language. No softening. Fraud. That was what he meant. Isaiah watched quietly from beside the podium while the atmosphere inside the auditorium transformed again. Not confusion anymore. Reality. The legal consequences had become real. Daniel closed the folder. I cannot discuss ongoing federal coordination publicly. That sentence alone confirmed enough. Federal coordination, meaning agencies were already involved behind the scenes. Daniel's eyes moved toward Isaiah briefly, but based on the timeline and preserved documentation, he paused. Mr. Russell appears to have acted as a preservation witness rather than a participant. A heavy silence followed, because that distinction changed everything: the media narrative, the board pressure, the internal panic. Isaiah felt hundreds of eyes shifting toward him differently now. Not hero worship, something quieter, trust beginning carefully. Daniel stepped away from the microphone. Charles Holloway moved beside him. Thank you, Mr. Mercer. The former investigator nodded once and exited without another word. No media statement, no grand finale, just confirmation. And somehow that made it feel even more serious. Isaiah returned slowly to the podium. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then operations updates will continue as scheduled. A few tired laughs escaped through the auditorium. Small, human. The tension finally cracked slightly. Isaiah looked across the room. Whatever happens legally, he glanced toward the remote warehouse screens. People still need paychecks. Freight still needs to move. That sentence grounded the room again immediately. Because underneath all the investigations and headlines, thousands of employees still depended on Vanguard functioning tomorrow morning. Isaiah understood that more deeply than most executives ever had. After the town hall ended, employees remained in clusters across the auditorium, speaking quietly. Some looked relieved. Others still looked terrified. But the atmosphere had changed. Not stable yet, just less poisoned by uncertainty. Trevor caught up with Isaiah near the backstage hallway. Federal investigators, he said quietly. Jesus. Isaiah kept walking. Yeah. Trevor shook his head. You realize you're probably the most talked about person in Chicago business news right now. That sounds exhausting. Trevor actually laughed. You really don't care about any of this attention, do you? Isaiah paused briefly beside the backstage exit. Outside, rain still covered the city in cold gray reflections. No, he said honestly. And he meant it. Because attention had never protected him before. Not during hospital nights, not during debt, not during the years quietly watching dishonest executives rise faster than competent people. Attention disappeared quickly. Systems remained. That was what mattered. By Thursday morning, the collapse accelerated. 3 senior executives resigned before noon, Martin Keller among them. 2 others were placed on administrative leave after forensic auditors traced vendor payment approvals directly into compensation manipulation structures. CNBC parked permanent media crews outside headquarters. Stock volatility triggered temporary trading halts twice during the day. Investors demanded emergency stabilization plans. Isaiah barely noticed any of it. He spent 14 straight hours inside operations calls with regional supervisors and warehouse teams. Fuel routing, dispatch stabilization, contract retention, real work. That was what kept companies alive. At 8:15 p.m., Isaiah finally stepped onto the executive floor again after most employees had gone home. The hallways felt strangely empty now, like abandoned luxury. Damian Whitmore's former office remained dark behind glass walls overlooking the river. The nameplate had already been removed. Corporate systems erase people quickly once power disappeared. Evelyn Mercer stood near the windows reviewing legal updates on her tablet. You should go home. Isaiah loosened his tie slightly. So should you. She ignored that. Federal subpoenas are being prepared. Isaiah nodded once, and Damian Evelyn looked toward the rain-dark skyline. His attorneys are negotiating. For what, reduced exposure, probably. Isaiah stayed silent. He remembered Damian standing confidently at the head of the conference table, humiliating employees like power itself guaranteed safety forever. Now, federal investigators circled his financial records while executives quietly abandoned him. Systems turned fast once fear changed direction. Evelyn crossed her arms. You know something strange, Isaiah looked at her. Most people in your position would be celebrating. He thought about that for a second, then looked down through the windows toward moving traffic far below. No. Evelyn studied him carefully. No what? No celebrating. He paused briefly. Too many people got hurt before any of this surfaced. Silence settled between them again. That was another thing Evelyn still struggled to understand about Isaiah Russell. He never treated the investigation like revenge, because revenge usually centered ego. This centered damage. Warehouse workers losing overtime, analysts burning out under manipulated targets, employees humiliated publicly to protect executive image. Isaiah carried all of that differently. Evelyn finally asked quietly, You never wanted power, did you? Isaiah almost smiled. Power attracts unstable people. Evelyn leaned back against the glass wall behind her. That's probably why the board trusts you. He looked toward the dark executive offices lining the hallway. Expensive furniture, private lounges, glass walls designed to make leadership appear elevated above everyone else. Then he said quietly, I think people confuse visibility with value. The sentence lingered heavily in the empty floor, because it described Vanguard perfectly. For years, the loudest people received promotions while the most competent people quietly absorbed operational damage underneath them. Isaiah survived precisely because nobody paid enough attention to him. Now that invisibility was gone, Charles Holloway appeared from the far hallway carrying another stack of legal documents beneath one arm. Even late at night, he moved with calm precision. We finally received confirmation, he said. Isaiah looked up. Damian Whitmore will be formally charged. The words landed quietly, not triumphantly. Charged with fraud, falsified reporting, conspiracy related to vendor compensation structures. Evelyn exhaled slowly through her nose. Charles continued. Several executives are cooperating already. Of course they were. Loyalty disappeared quickly once prison entered conversations. Charles handed Isaiah another folder. Isaiah opened it carefully. Inside sat official board documentation. Permanent executive leadership proposal. He looked up slowly. Charles watched him evenly. The board wants to remove the interim designation. Silence. Evelyn studied Isaiah carefully now. Neither of them looked excited, because they both understood what the offer actually meant. Responsibility, pressure, visibility. Everything Isaiah spent years avoiding. Charles folded his hands behind his back. Vanguard needs stable leadership moving forward. Isaiah stared at the documents for several long seconds. Outside the windows, Chicago glowed beneath endless rain and moving headlights. Then he closed the folder quietly. Not accepting, not refusing, just thinking. Because deep down, Isaiah already understood the hardest truth of all. Taking control of a damaged system meant carrying responsibility for rebuilding it, and rebuilding something honestly always costs more than destroying it. 1 year later, Vanguard Freight Systems looked like a different company. Not from outside. The headquarters still stood above Wacker Drive, wrapped in steel and glass. Freight trucks still crossed state lines through Midwest snowstorms. Dispatch centers still glowed through the night beneath fluorescent warehouse lighting. But inside the company, the atmosphere had changed completely. People spoke without lowering their voices now. That alone said enough. Employee turnover dropped 28% across Midwest operations. Overtime complaints fell sharply. Client retention stabilized after 2 brutal quarters of restructuring. Even the stock recovered, slowly, carefully, honestly. The business media called it one of the most surprising corporate recoveries in recent logistics history. Isaiah Russell hated hearing that sentence, because recoveries weren't surprising when workers finally stopped being treated like disposable numbers. It was early November now. Cold wind rolled through downtown Chicago, while sunrise reflected gold against the river outside Vanguard headquarters. At 6:08 a.m., Isaiah parked his old gray Toyota Camry in the same employee garage he'd used for years. No executive reserve spot, no company car, no driver. Security guards still greeted him by name because he still arrived before most executives. Some habits survive power. He stepped into the lobby carrying the same worn leather messenger bag, while employees filtered through revolving doors holding coffees and winter coats. A younger analyst froze slightly when he noticed Isaiah holding the elevator open for him. Uh, thanks, sir. Isaiah glanced sideways. Isaiah's fine. The analyst looked even more nervous somehow. That still happened. People treated titles differently than Isaiah did. He understood why. Power usually changed people visibly. Bigger offices, sharper suits, controlled smiles. Isaiah still worked primarily from the 19th floor, still drank burnt black coffee from the operations pantry, still reviewed freight routing personally during storms. Executives above him hated that. Warehouse workers respected it. At 6:42 a.m., Rachel Bennett walked onto the operations floor carrying a tablet and winter gloves. You know there's an executive breakfast upstairs waiting for you. Isaiah looked up from a routing screen. Then they'll probably survive without me. Rachel laughed once and dropped into the chair across from his desk. You realize you're technically the CEO now. Unfortunately. That earned another laugh. Rachel studied him carefully for a second. 1 year later, and you still look uncomfortable saying that. Isaiah returned attention to the monitor. Because titles don't move freight. Rachel leaned back. Neither does humility. But apparently, both help. The operations floor slowly filled around them while morning dispatch reports updated across the wall screens. Things felt stable now. Not perfect, but real. Isaiah preferred real. At 8:10 a.m., Evelyn Mercer entered the floor carrying 2 folders and visible exhaustion. Some things never changed. We finalized the Phoenix contract. Isaiah finally looked up. That mattered. Phoenix Medical Logistics represented the largest freight agreement in Vanguard history. Multi-state medical supply transport. 7-year commitment. The contract Damian Whitmore nearly destroyed chasing inflated quarterly bonuses. Evelyn placed the paperwork on Isaiah's desk. Board wants the official signing upstairs. Isaiah sighed quietly. Of course they do. Rachel smirked. Try pretending you enjoy executive life for at least 10 minutes. Isaiah ignored her. But internally, something softer moved through him briefly. A year earlier, Rachel probably would have lost her position under Damien's restructuring plans. Now she oversaw operational labor coordination across 4 regional centers. Competent people finally stayed visible. That changed companies more than slogans ever did. By noon, the official contract signing finished upstairs beneath cameras and carefully rehearsed investor language. Isaiah tolerated it, barely. The moment reporters started asking questions about transformational leadership philosophy, he escaped downstairs again. Trevor caught up with him near the elevators. Not Trevor anymore, technically. Now Senior Operations Coordinator. Still looked surprised every time he read his own title. You disappearing already? Yes, media's looking for you. That sounds avoidable. Trevor laughed. You know, a year ago I thought you hated everybody here. Isaiah paused slightly. I was tired. That's different. Trevor nodded slowly. That answer stayed with him, because people often confused exhaustion with coldness. Isaiah wasn't cold. He was careful. There was a difference. Around 4:20 p.m., Isaiah finally left headquarters after 12 straight hours of meetings and operational reviews. Cold November air rolled through downtown Chicago while federal courthouse lights glowed several blocks away. Traffic moved slowly through evening congestion. Then Isaiah noticed someone standing near the courthouse steps. Dark overcoat, gray hair, hands buried in pockets against the wind. Damien Whitmore. For a second, neither man moved. The city noise continued around them. Car horns, wind, distant sirens. 1 year earlier, Damien Whitmore controlled entire conference rooms through fear alone. Now federal fraud charges waited inside the building behind him. Time changed power brutally. Damien looked older. Not dramatically, just diminished, like someone who finally understood how temporary image always was. Isaiah approached slowly. No anger, no satisfaction, just stillness. Damien gave a short, humorless laugh. You win. Isaiah looked toward the courthouse briefly. This wasn't a game. Damien studied him carefully. You know what your problem always was? Isaiah waited. You never wanted anything, the old accusation again, but now it sounded weaker, tired. Isaiah answered quietly. No. Cold wind moved between them. Damien shook his head slowly. That's why people followed you. Neither man spoke after that, because somewhere deep down, Damien finally understood the truth he missed for years. Fear controlled employees temporarily. Respect kept systems alive. A black federal sedan pulled toward the courthouse curb. Damien glanced toward it once, then back at Isaiah. For the first time since they met, there was no performance left in his face, just exhaustion. He turned without another word and walked toward the courthouse entrance beneath cold evening lights. Isaiah watched him disappear inside. No victory speech followed. No dramatic revenge. Because real consequences rarely felt cinematic once they arrived. Just heavy. After a moment, Isaiah turned and continued walking toward the river. The Chicago skyline reflected across dark water while early winter wind carried the smell of snow somewhere far beyond the city. He stopped briefly near the railing overlooking the Riverwalk. Traffic moved across the bridges above him. Freight trains echoed faintly somewhere in the distance. Systems moving, still alive. His phone buzzed softly. Evelyn. Contract finalized. Board celebrating upstairs. You coming back? Isaiah looked toward the glowing headquarters tower across the river, then toward the moving city beyond it. Finally, he typed back, tomorrow. A few minutes later, the first light of sunrise began breaking faintly against the edge of the skyline. Cold gold across steel and glass. Isaiah stood quietly beside the river, watching the city wake up around him. 1 year earlier, people inside Vanguard thought he was invisible, forgettable, replaceable. Now the company moved differently because one quiet man refused to let dishonesty become normal. And somewhere deep down, Isaiah finally understood something himself. Silence was never weakness. Not when it came from patience, not when it came from preparation, and not when the truth had been quietly gathering strength the entire time. Life has a strange way of revealing people over time. The loudest person in the room often looks powerful in the moment, but real strength usually hides somewhere quieter. In the people who keep working while others chase attention, in the people who document the truth instead of performing confidence. Isaiah Russell never won because he humiliated anyone back. He won because he stayed steady long enough for the system to expose itself. A lot of workplaces look polished from the outside, while fear and manipulation quietly grow underneath. Many people watching this probably know what it feels like to be underestimated, ignored, or treated like they don't matter simply because they aren't loud. But patience, preparation, and integrity leave longer shadows than ego ever will. So tell me honestly, have you ever worked under someone who abused power or underestimated you? And if you had the chance, would you expose the truth or walk away quietly? And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe before you leave. Tomorrow's story is about a father who was thrown out of his own company by his family until one phone call changed everything.